Let us now look at the new inspector. I'm going to pull it to make it a little bigger. You can see at the first glance, it doesn't seem like it changed much, but if you expand the categories, you'll see that overall it looks a lot cleaner than back in Godot 3.0. I'm going to do the same, expand a few properties here. You can see it's not as colorful. The size of the different elements that you can interact with is quite different, and you don't see a difference between the types of values that you can edit, like in Godot 3.1. So it's been rewritten entirely here to be a lot easier to work with and a lot more comfortable. For floating point values, you now have sliders that you can use to change the value, obviously. You can also click and drag up and down on the combo box to fine-tune the value, and you can go left and right as well for good measure. You have the little arrow still to reset the value. That now works better than in Godot 3.0. There were some small bugs in the past with that. You have checkboxes for Boolean values. We have for collision layers now little boxes that you can directly click and interact with, and you still have the ability to get the name of the layers by clicking on the few dots next to the collision layer widget. For vector2s and any value like a matrix, for example, that's going to have multiple components, you're going to get the breakdown of these components, and they're laid out vertically so that you can use Tab and Shift Tab to navigate between the values and work a little more with the keyboard. For integers, you now have this little box with the double arrow on the side, and so the slider that you can always see on floats differentiates it from the integer widget. For the rest, for example, for colors, the difference is not as big, but you can notice the dark shadow behind the parameters that are editable so that it's a little easier to spot them. Here is the example of a 3D scene. This is The Littlest Tokyo by Glenatron. It's under a CC BY license. You'll have a link in the description. So you can see that now if you have 3D vectors, for example, you can get all three components of the vector aligned X, Y, and Z. More so than that, resources that are assigned to a given node can now be edited straight in line with the rest of the inspector. I'll take the world environment node that would normally just show you the environment here. And if you click on the resource, once you've created and loaded it, you can unfold it in the current inspector. A little line that's going to be light blue shows you that you're editing a sub-resource, and you can expand the category and keep going. You can expand yet sub-resources, and you will get a second line or block that frames it and shows you that you are going into nested resources. You can still edit a resource, have it take its own inspector by clicking on the arrow next to it and clicking on the edit button. Once you get there, you get a dedicated inspector. So if you go down into nested resources 2 or 3 levels, this can be useful at times. Then the arrow at the top, the back arrow, allows you to go back to the parent node. Or you can click on the name of the resource. Now, if you look at the top of the inspector, next to the name of the resource, you have 2 icons that indicate that you are in a nested resource in its own inspector. And if you click on it, you can see the sub-resources it contains. Then the icon in the top right corner gives you a history of the resources you navigated to so that you can go back a few steps back in the inspector. Or again, you can use the next and back arrows at the top of the inspector. Going back to the previous project, if you open a music-related node or resource, like my song here, now an editor at the bottom allows you to preview the audio, to scrub through it, and to play and stop it. Now allow me to open some particle material for another example, because there are quite a few properties in there. If I expand the scale category and the curve here, you can see that we can edit it in line in the editor. You can do the same with the color gradients. All in all, the inspector, as I told you, is much more convenient to use than it used to be. Another key improvement is that you can now edit arrays and dictionaries in the inspector. I have two exported variables in my script here, one of type array, the other as a dictionary. If I click on the array field, it unfolds a list of values. I have to set the array size in order to edit them. I'm going to set them to 5, which opens 5 fields with an edit button next to it. That allows you to select the type of the value that you want to add in there. Say you want an array of positions. We're going to create vector2s for that. And you can then manually input the values for each of the fields. So you can do exported arrays this way. I'm going to reset that for the array, show you the dictionary that works very similarly. You just want to create the keys and values one after the other by clicking the edit button. It's most common to use strings or integers, although you can use any type. You can type the name of the key, for example, items, or let's say potions, and the value will be a count, an integer. Let's set it to 3. You can add key value pairs by clicking the corresponding button. Every time you do so, it commits the previous value. That you can click the edit button to change it, and the value that you have on the right side of the key is going to keep its type. So it then turns into a selector, for example, the combo box for the integer value here. I'm going to reset that, fold it, and we can move 2 important notes about the new inspector. You have the ability to fold and unfold categories in the inspector. And in Godot 3.0, these would be stored in the scene file, in the demo file in this case. When you would commit this to Git or to a version control system, this would pollute your file with a list of the folded categories. Now it's not the case anymore, they get stored elsewhere, so there was a big improvement with that. Regarding code and technical things, I want to mention that you now have an inspector plugin class that you can extend to extend the functionality in the inspector. So I'll invite you to check out this one to see what you can do. You can now customize the inspector through plugins, which was not available before. And we have one last small thing to look at still. When you enter a value in one of the properties, you can now use expressions. For example, I could type 6 times 5. It's going to give me 30 in my offset here. You can use a few functions in there. For example, if I want the sine of 2 radians, it's a value in radians, not degrees. It's going to give me a value that's close to 1. So you can use a number of expressions like these. You can also access these through code. If you look into the docs to see a bit more about that, you want to look for the expression class. You can open it, you will find 1 or 2 examples, although there doesn't seem to be a complete reference of the functions you can use in the expressions. I suspect that these are the GDScript built-in functions. My guess is that these are the built-in GDScript functions, although don't quote me on that. So you can check for @GDScript in the help and see if you can use all of these. I know that power that I've been using works, cos and sine do work, so I guess that a few of these work. And obviously addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, or modulo should work. For modulo 3 gives us 1. Yes, it works. So that is it for the overview of the inspector. In the next video, we will look at, I don't know, probably the file system tab. See you there.